Okay, so you may be thinking, wow, Plato's cave, that was a really weird video. I have no idea what that means. Let's start with a little bit of background. Plato is not extremely important to theology or the study of theology, but I really love this analogy because it speaks truth. But before we talk about the analogy or we talk about the analogy of the cave, let's talk about Plato for a quick second, just to give you a little bit of background or a little bit of history. Plato lived from 427 to 347 BC. He is the most well-known philosopher in history. In fact, if you take any philosophy class, you'll probably start with Plato, and you'll read a lot of his works. But what's more important to me is that he was a semi-contemporary with Aristotle, who was extremely influential in or foundational in Catholic philosophy. So Aristotle influenced Aquinas, who in turn influenced church doctrine with his works. So just for my history buffs or my philosophy buffs, it's important to know that. But Plato isn't as important to theology as Aristotle was, but this analogy is a wonderful analogy for what we're going to talk about this semester. We're going to talk a lot about truth. Um, I think over the course of the last couple of years here at St. Pius in theology, you've probably heard, your theology classes have probably taught you, you know, to about faith, about the Bible, about believing in things because it's the Bible, because Jesus said it. And that's true. You absolutely should believe, everything that's been taught to you in your theology courses here because it's true. But what I want to point out to you is that Jesus's words are true not only because they're in the Bible or not only because he's God, but because he speaks truth itself. So the Bible is not just some random book that we have to believe. It's stupid, it's silly, it's childish. That's not true. The New Testament, Jesus's words, they are true in terms of truth itself. And we will talk about truth itself in a minute. Church teachings, especially in morality and proper behavior, which we'll talk about this entire year, they are true. They are based on reality. They're true not just because Jesus said it, but also because they are based on truth itself, reality itself. So I love the analogy of the cave because I feel like many of us in America or in the world are in the cave. If you remember the analogy, everyone is chained, right? Um, they're chained and they have to look at these images that are shadows. So think to yourself for a second, or I'll give you a second to think, what do you think those chains represent? Give you another second. Typically, guys, when you're talking about chains, you're usually talking about being held down, right? Being held back by something. We're talking about Plato here, and Plato was a pagan, so he was prior to Jesus, so he had no concept of Christianity or anything like that. But if you notice in the Gospels, usually when people talk about sin, they talk about being chained to sin. And being freed from sin usually means that you're coming to know the truth. Usually the truth is what sets you free. Remember, as Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Yeah, so that is where the Platonic analogy actually builds into the Christian analogy as well, which is funny because Plato was a pagan. He had no concept of any of this, but his words were still true, or some of his words were still true, that we can be bound, we can be chained by our sin, maybe by the culture. Maybe the culture isn't giving us the truth. Um, all that we're seeing on the walls, or all that we're seeing in our lives, are um, shadows, things that aren't really true. So I saw something on Facebook the other day that made me laugh so hard. It's probably because I'm a philosopher, and you might think this is cheesy, but someone posted it. One of my friends, who is a philosophy professor up north, posted a picture or a meme of Plato's cave. So you had some people chained to a wall, like the image that you see here. But what was happening in the background was someone was throwing a football in the background, and so the shadows on the wall were like American football. And I laughed really hard because I thought it's true. This is a cultural norm um, that some of us are bound by, or some of us don't really realize, that we're controlled by it. Or it was just funny. And I don't dislike football. I'm not picking on football. It was just funny because most Americans are obsessive about football and to a fault. So You can still have modern analogies for the cave, for the cave. But yeah, so when you come out of the cave, or when the character exited the cave, what happened? You don't need to worry about how he got free. I mean, in the story, he's released, and if you read the actual book, he was released. But you don't need to worry about how he got out. But what happens once he gets out? It's really bright, right? Like it's really dark in the cave, and his eyes are used to the dark. And he comes out of the cave, and all of a sudden, it's really bright. And what happens when you turn on a bright light after being in the dark? Your eyes to hurt, right? Like it takes a second or two for you to acclimate to the light, and it's painful sometimes, or it's kind of hard to see, for a minute or two, and then you get used to it. So I love this part of the analogy that when you are released from your sin, or when you're released from the culture, or you're released from something that's holding you back, sometimes it's a little painful. It's like coming into the light. And I use this as the Christian analogy, that the Christian analogy is coming into the light. And sometimes it's painful to hear what the church has to say. Sometimes it's painful to hear what Jesus has to say. Sometimes we don't like it. But that doesn't change the fact that this is the truth. It doesn't change the fact that Jesus is truth. It doesn't change the fact that the church's teachings are true. Just because we don't like them, and just because it's difficult for us, that doesn't mean that it's not true. So coming out of the cave, again, remember being hit by the light, by the goodness, by the beauty, by truth. You remember the colors he saw, the music he heard when he exited the cave. Think about that in terms of Christianity, or in terms of this class, that there's a whole other life out there, a whole nother way of living that you may not even know about right now. That, yeah, it might be really difficult for you to hear some of these things because these are controversial topics, in theology this year. But if you give it a chance and you let yourself get used to it, there's a whole other world out there filled with joy, and peace and love and harmony that you may not ever be aware of, and you may not have been aware of before. And you may never have come to know these truths if you weren't someone who spent time around Catholic doctrine, or at this school, or in these classes. So I use this analogy for this class because Christianity is like coming out of the cave. And I love how this happened, especially with a pagan philosopher, that there are aspects of truth outside of the church, but they're just little glimmers of truth. They're not completely true or holistically true like the teachings are in the church. So keep an open mind about the class. Think of this class as the analogy, or the analogy of coming out of the cave, and keep an open mind. So this brings us to the battle between faith and reason. Typically, and you'll see this, I guess, in the next slide as well, but typically the culture teaches us that faith is stupid, faith is silly, and you're stupid if you believe in it, if you're a faithful person, and if you're a scientist, then you can't have any faith because you're intelligent, all you have is reason. There's nothing other than reason. That's usually what the culture teaches us, but that could not be farther from the truth. It is so far from the truth that it's hilarious. So one of the things that I want to accomplish this year, and I want you to open your mind about this year, is that the church's teachings, especially the teachings on morality, especially the teachings on morality, are based on reason. Okay, they are reasonable, they are logical, which I know I'm speaking slowly, but I'm doing this on purpose. They're reasonable and they are logical. The church's moral teachings do not come from a random pope, pulled out of thin air. They do not come from a random priest somewhere who decided, hey, let's ruin people's lives and make life boring. No, that's absolutely not true. The church's moral teachings, meaning the teachings that guide your behavior, are based on reality itself. And so we'll talk about that in the coming year. But I want you to start changing your thinking about church doctrine and church teaching. Yes, there are some things that we cannot know by reason alone. Examples would be the Trinity. I guess the Eucharist, the real presence of the Eucharist, and even that's kind of questionable because there have been Eucharistic miracles where they have been able to scientifically test them, and lo and behold, there's actual DNA in Eucharistic miracles, which is pretty amazing. but at the end of the day, you can't really test the real presence of the Eucharist. So you just have to believe that. There are some teachings in the Catholic Church that you can't really test scientifically. But when it comes to the moral teachings of the Catholic Church, in other words, things that guide your behavior, teachings that guide your behavior, those things are logical. There is a logic, there is a philosophy, there's a reason behind them. It's not just because Jesus said it. I mean, it is. Yes, Jesus said most of these things, but it's also because Jesus's words are true, based on truth itself. So here is another view of the relationship between faith and reason. As you can see, the culture, I put this little line in the middle, the little yellow line in the middle of the two, because the culture traditionally likes to keep them separated. I mean, just think about it, the separation of church and state. The culture usually tries to keep faith and reason separated. And I hear people say things like, don't put your religious beliefs into your political beliefs, and, you can't legislate morality. If you believe that abortion is wrong, you can't tell me abortion is wrong. That's your religion. And that's not entirely true. Okay. The way that the church's teachings are based on truth itself, again, especially when it comes to morality and proper behavior. I don't disagree with abortion because of my religious beliefs. I mean, yes, that's, the church does not support abortion, but on a scientific level and a logical level, I don't support abortion for a scientific reason, for both reasons, because of faith and because of reason. I don't believe in abortion because of what I have been taught by the church and by God and Jesus, but I also don't believe in abortion because there are scientific reasons to not believe in it or agree with it, or agree that it's okay. So most of the church's teachings regarding morality have both a scientific component or a logical component and a faith component. Okay, so it's not just one or the other, it's both, and they both work together. Faith works with reason, reason works with faith. Faith strengthens your reason, and reason strengthens faith. So here I want you to get the definitions of faith and reason. Faith, this is a very important definition. I want you to have it. I want you to write it down. Faith is believing in something on the basis that it is God who reveals it. Typically, you tell me that faith is believing in something you cannot see. That is not entirely accurate. I mean, it's a good start, but it's not entirely accurate. Faith is accepting that God will reveal truth to us. Okay, so we believe in something because God revealed it, and we trust God. We trust that God is not going to lie to us. Does that make sense? Okay, and if it doesn't, ask your sub, because I'm not here. Reason traditionally is when we form judgments by a process of logic. So we use our intellects to reach certain conclusions, logical conclusions, scientific conclusions. They're different than the conclusions that we reach by, or the way that we reach the conclusions by faith. But again, I'm going to say this again as a little baby review. Faith is strengthened by reason, and reason in turn is strengthened by faith. Okay, so now we get into the question of what is truth? As Pontius Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? I've been throwing that word around a lot, like I know it, like I believe that you know what I mean, and you may not know what I mean, or you may think you know what I mean, but maybe you don't know. So the definition of truth that I want you to have is that truth is an accurate depiction or articulation of reality. An accurate depiction or articulation of reality. It is a statement that is aligned with reality itself. So if I look outside and I say it is raining right now, that is only true if it is actually raining right now, okay, in reality. If it's not raining, I'm wrong. So this is very important when we talk about truth. Truth is truth regardless of your perception. This is a huge problem in America right now. I'm sorry, I'm just going to get on my soapbox. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. We have been taught in this country from a pretty early, a young age, that if you believe it, no one can tell you anything different, that you have a right to believe what you want. That is not true. That is not true. Your perception can be wrong. My perception can be wrong. The truth itself, reality itself, is not determined by your personal opinion or your personal belief, or even mine. My truth is not determined by my personal opinion. So, for example, if none of us in the room, as you can see here on the PowerPoint, if none of us in the room believe in New York City, is New York City still there? I know this sounds like a silly question, and you should know the answer. The answer is yes. New York City is still there, regardless of whether or not I believe it's there. Um, Even though I've never been to France, I know it's there. I don't have to physically see it to know that it's there, or I don't even have to believe that it's there to know that it's there. I'm sorry, that was incorrect. I don't have to believe that it's there. It's there, regardless of what I believe. It doesn't matter. Um, this is actually, and again, I know this sounds silly, but this is actually a really big deal. I once met someone on the streets in Boston who we had this exact same conversation because she stopped me. My husband and I were on vacation oh my goodness, years ago at this point, and she stopped me on the street because I was wearing a Harvard sweatshirt, which I guess she thought that she was finding or meeting someone who agreed with her because I was wearing a Harvard sweatshirt. But she stopped me on the street and she said, would you like to talk about women's rights? And I was like, yes, please. And my husband was trying, no, Heidi, no, it's not worth it. And I said, oh, no, yes, it is. So, we started talking about abortion and things like that. And she was working for Planned Parenthood, trying to get signatures for, I don't know, something about abortion. And I had this very conversation with her because she told me, well, it doesn't really matter. It's not a person. And I said, look, let's have a conversation. Forget about this, about, personhood or anything like that, whether or not that a baby is a baby in the womb. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about truth itself. If you don't believe in a human being in the womb, is it still a human? And she said, well, no. And I said, okay. What if I believe it is a human? Is it a human? And she said, well, I mean, I guess. I said, okay, so you're trying to tell me that what you believe is just as good as what I believe and neither of us are right? Well, I guess. And I said, okay, let's forget about babies. What about New York City? If you don't believe that New York City exists, is New York City still there? I kid you not, guys. She said no. I'm not kidding. She looked me in the eyes and she said, no, if I don't believe something is there, it's not there. And I said, okay, you've got to be kidding me, right? Like that's silly. I mean, seriously. I mean, she was an intelligent woman. She was intelligent enough to know what I was trying to do with this question. She was intelligent enough to know that I was comparing her answer to New York City to her answer to, to babies in the womb. So she was intelligent enough to know what I was doing, but she was so stubborn she would not back down from her answer. And I laughed at her and I said, come on, you've got to be kidding me. New York City is there regardless of whether or not you agree that it's there. Or even if you believe it's there, it's still there. And she, would not back down. And she even told me I was being rude to her, that I was being hateful. And I said, I'm not being hateful. I'm just trying to make you understand that your opinion is wrong. New York City is there. Oh my goodness. You can't possibly believe this. So yeah, it was extremely difficult to have a conversation with her because she absolutely positively would not agree that if she doesn't believe in something, she would not back down. If I don't believe in it, it's not there. And I think a lot of people live their lives like this, saying, well, if I don't agree with it, it doesn't matter because my opinion is the only one that matters. That's not true. Okay, you need to make sure that your opinions are based on reality itself. And here's where, let me give you an example that everybody in the room is going to agree with. Racism is wrong, period. That is a true statement. I have known many racists in my life. I've met racists here. Some of our students are racist. It's just when you get a bunch of people together, that's what happens. Okay, people have different beliefs. But if you are racist and you believe that it's okay to be racist, are you right? No, you're not right. You're wrong. Okay, so it's the same thing with other issues, okay? Other moral issues. Abortion is either okay or it's not. Okay, we obviously haven't had this conversation. We'll talk about abortion in the spring. But either we're right about abortion or we're wrong. There's really no other way to talk about it. Same thing with racism. It's either okay to be racist or it's not. Clearly, it's not. It's not okay. And if you believe to the depths of your soul that it's okay to be racist, you're wrong. I'm sorry. Hate to be offensive, but you are wrong. It is not okay to be racist. I don't care how you were raised. I don't care what, your parents say. I don't care what your friends say. I don't care about what anybody tells you. It's wrong. Okay, so you need to make sure that when you're examining your life, which I hope you're going to start doing because you're getting older, you're juniors now, when you're examining your life and your belief system, you need to make sure that what you believe is actually true. Because otherwise you can do some serious damage. You can really hurt people. You can really do terrible things to yourself and others if your beliefs are wrong. So it's very important that our beliefs are aligned with reality. There are two types of truths that come into play when we talk about theology and philosophy. There is qualitative truth, which if you look on the PowerPoint, qualitative has an L, and there's quantitative truth, has a T. Qualitative truths are things that cannot be measured, things that cannot be touched. Love, goodness, truth, beauty, um, good music, I guess, good art, that sort of thing. Those are the kinds of things that cannot be measured, but they are true. Freedom. Oh, here we go. Freedom is a good example. You can't really measure love scientifically. I mean, you can talk about how many hugs your parents give you, or you can talk about how many endorphins are released when your parents see you or you see your parents, or you can talk about, I'm trying to think what else love. You can talk about scientific effects of love, but you can't really measure love scientifically. You can't measure how many nice things your parents have done for you or you've done for your parents. It's not something that's measurable, but that doesn't mean that it's not true. Same thing with justice. You can't really, you can measure justice, I guess, in terms of trying to be as fair to everybody as possible, but at the end of the day, you can't really scientifically measure justice. You can't measure that which is just. You can measure the effects of it, but you can't really measure justice itself. That's a qualitative truth. Quantitative truths are much easier. You can measure those things. You can touch them. You can see them. You can feel them. You can hear them. Quantity versus quality. Okay, qualitative truth and quantitative truth, both of them are equally true. Keep that in mind and write that down. Okay, so up until this point in your life, you may have only thought to yourself that quantitative truths are the only truths that exist. You may have thought, if I can't see it or touch it, it's not there and it's not real and you can't prove it. There's a serious problem with that. If only quantitative truths exist, and there's nothing other than the material world. And you may not really care about that right now, but it actually is a really big deal. If there's nothing other than quantitative truths, then you, sitting in this room right now, you are nothing other than a collection of bones, cells, your skin, your organs, your neurons firing in your brain, or your, I guess, electricity firing in your brain. You're nothing other than those things. And I would hope that you don't want to get rid of the fact that there's something spiritual to you. There's something more to you than just your bones, your organs, your skin, your hair color, your eye color. There's something more to you. There's, the way your personality, the way that you think, the way that you feel, your relationships. Those things are qualitative. Those are things that cannot be touched. There are aspects to you as a human being that are qualitative, just like there are aspects to you as a human being that are quantitative. Both are equally important. Also, again, as you see on the PowerPoint, freedom, justice, love, goodness, beauty, all of these things fall into the category of qualitative truths. Clearly, we're not going to sacrifice those things like freedom and justice just because we don't want to believe in qualitative truths. If you don't believe in qualitative truths, then you can't tell me that you believe in freedom, justice, goodness, beauty, art, or good art, good music. which I know none of you are willing to say. So, these things, freedom, justice, goodness, beauty, good art, good music, all of those things exist regardless of our opinions. It's important to remember that, guys, that qualitative truths are just as important as quantitative truths. Okay, so we've already gone over some of this information as well already. I've already told you that what you believe needs to be based on reality. What you believe needs to correspond to reality itself. I'm going to say this again because it's that important. Just because you believe something, that doesn't mean it's right or true. There are different types of beliefs or truths, in addition to the qualitative and quantitative, okay? Don't forget about qualitative and quantitative. You have things that are objective and things that are subjective. Okay, so an example of an objective truth or an objective statement is an accurate statement of reality regardless of perception. Oh, sounds like the definition of truth. Huh, that's not an accident. An example of an objective statement or an objectively true statement is humans exist, or New York City exists, or at least New York City exists now. Maybe, I don't know, 500 years from now it might not. But as of right now, when I'm saying this, New York City exists. It's objective. Or if you look out the window and I make a comment on the weather that is correct, it is objective. I don't know what the weather's like in August. I'm recording this in April. um, so when we get into subjective perceptions, that's when it becomes much more complicated or much more controversial. A subjective perception is an experience or thought of an individual or group that is not universally true for everyone. An experience or thought of an individual or group that is not universally true for everyone. Example might be, the United States of America is the best country in the world. You might look at that and think, oh, it's true. I agree. I love America. Or you might look at that and think, I don't know. I mean, it's not, you can't, that's not true. We have no way of knowing that. There are other countries that are wonderful countries, other places to live that are wonderful places. This is not an objective statement. It is my opinion or someone's opinion. It's subjective. Okay, it's a perception. I could say the same thing about ice cream. Vanilla ice cream is the best flavor out there. Clearly, that is subjective perception. That is not an accurate statement of reality. That's just opinion. That's it. Okay. And this an opinion about, ice cream is not something that really can be measured. If I really love ice cream and I think that vanilla is the best, then okay, no big deal. Okay. But we need to understand that there are some things that are okay that are okay remaining subjective, like ice cream, okay, or my vanilla flavored ice cream, which honestly I don't really drink. In all honesty, I don't eat ice cream. I eat yogurt only. So I don't even like ice cream. See, that's my subjective perception. You might think I'm crazy. And that's okay. You have the ability to think I'm crazy from my subjective perception. However, if I believe to the depths of my soul that ice cream is terrible and that no one should be allowed to eat ice cream, I'm wrong, because that's not an objective truth. The only things that are authentically true are objective truths or objective statements, and those are very important objective truths. And it's difficult to know the difference. Like, for example, the whole joke about ice cream, yeah, no big deal. Okay, if I really believe vanilla is the best, no big deal. It's not going to hurt anybody. But let's go back to racism. If I subjectively perceive, remember, look at the vocabulary words, if I subjectively perceive that racism is wrong, or racism, yeah, if racism, I mean, I can use that, that's fine. If I subjectively perceive that racism is wrong, that's okay, because it's also objectively true that racism is wrong. But what if I subjectively perceive that racism is right? That is a problem. That is a serious problem, as I already said in previous slides, that our perceptions and our opinions need to match reality. How does that happen? Guys, it's not easy. I'm going to be honest with you. How do we make our perceptions, our subjective perceptions, match reality? Or how do we make sure that our subjective perceptions are objectively true? It's very difficult. It requires a lot of research, a lot of thought, a lot of discussion and conversation about these things, a lot of soul searching, okay? You can't decide that abortion is okay in 10 seconds. You can't decide that. You can't decide that racism is okay in 10 seconds. You have to actually sit down and think and examine the issues and um, look at history and culture and what does the Bible say? What does Jesus say? What does the church say? You need to research all of this and think about this. And that's what we're doing this year, is trying to make sure that your subjective perceptions about morality are objectively true. So we're going to talk about things like euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, war, nuclear warfare, um, immigration, refugees, abortion, capital punishment, all of these things where people have a lot of subjective perceptions about all of these issues, and we're going to make sure that your opinions and your beliefs are aligned with objective truth itself. And when we talk about truth, I would be doing you a disservice if I did not point out that Jesus himself is recorded using the word truth 78 times in the Gospels. That is actually very important. Jesus usually focuses on the poor. If you go and count all of the times that he focuses on the poor, he focuses on the poor the most, and loving the poor, caring for the poor, that sort of thing. But after that, his next goal, or his next most important topic, is truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am truth itself. So if you pay attention to his words, Jesus was very focused on truth. And I want to reiterate one more time before you forget, or before, if you missed it, I want to say this one more time. The teachings of Catholic morality correspond to the nature of truth itself. They are objectively true. Okay, use your vocabulary word. They are not subjective. They are objective. When students argue with me about capital punishment, yeah, well, that's your opinion about capital punishment, but I believe we should kill them. No, it's not my opinion. It's truth itself. And I know this is really harsh for, an incoming junior class to hear immediately, but that's the nature of this class. It is a harsh class, and it's a harsh look at what we're going to be discussing all year long. That you need to understand that the teachings of the Catholic Church are based on truth itself. That somebody in the Vatican didn't decide one day, oh, you know what? We're going to outlaw capital punishment. Yeah, let's do that. Woohoo, fun. No, that's not how it happened. Okay? The teachings on capital punishment are based on the truth of human dignity. Okay? The reality of the objective truth of human dignity, which we'll talk about a lot in the coming weeks, or I guess in September when I come back. So it's a matter of changing your way of thinking, that no, this is not my opinion, or this is not the church's opinion. This is the church's teaching based on reality itself, based on the teachings of Christ. And all of his words are true, are truth itself. Okay, his words are truth, or truths. Those things are real. They are based on reality itself. We have the ability as humans to know the truth, and we have the desire to seek the truth. We need both qualitative and quantitative truths to have an accurate depiction of reality itself. Reality, we would not understand reality without both qualitative and quantitative truths. They're both important. So keep that in mind as we move forward. On the next slide, or the next time you watch this video, or the next video you're going to watch, is going to cover Fides et Ratio, which is John Paul's encyclical, or St. John Paul's encyclical, Faith and Reason. Faith and Reason, the encyclical, and the selections that I gave you to read, outlines the relationship between faith and reason, which is, I covered some of it already, but John Paul also covers things that I did not cover with you. We'll cover it in the reading. So when you read Fides et Ratio for homework, when you read and annotate Fides et Ratio, keep in mind that the whole point of the reading is to introduce you to the church's teachings about the relationship between faith and reason and how they work together.